In this episode, I talk with Nicole Jardim, creator of Fix Your Period. We talk about the incredible dangers of the birth control pill, how to get off of it, and what to do instead. Welcome to the Flower Lounge, a place for conversations with wildly creative people and a little plant-loving wisdom to help you experience life in full bloom. I'm Katie Hess, flower alchemist and founder of LOTUSWEI, and I believe in a world where we're all living at our personal edge. Welcome to the Flowerlounge Podcast. I have sitting with me Nicole Jardim, who is a certified women's health coach and the creator of Fix Your Period, which is a series of programs that empower women to reclaim their hormonal health using a method that combines simplicity and sass. And she's coming out with a book with that same title. And if any of you have heard any of the previous episodes or you know Erin Borbet from the Costa Rica retreat, that is how Nicole and I connected. And Nicole's work has impacted the lives of hundreds of thousands of women around the world around period problems like PMS, irregular periods, PCOS, painful periods, amenorrhea, and all kinds of things. And she's the co-host of The Period Party, a top-rated podcast on iTunes that you can add to your new podcast list. So if you are looking to fix your period, check that out. And she's also the creator of the Institute for Integrative Nutrition's Hormonal Health Continuing Education course. So thanks so much for being with us, Nicole.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yes. Okay, so we usually start out with this little exercise where you close your eyes and go back to a time when you were a child and you were playing around flowers or plants or trees. And just think about what you were up to at the time, who you were with, and see if you can identify a favorite flower or botanical. And then reflect on the 3 words you would use to describe its personality. Take your time, and whenever you're ready, you can open your eyes and just share everything you're thinking about with us and your favorite and the 3 words.
I love that so much. Oh my goodness. I grew up in Antigua in the Caribbean, and I spent a lot of time outdoors. In fact, we lived far out of town. So we were my sister and I were pretty much on our own most of the time, and we would just wander off and go exploring. And our yard was pretty big, and my mom had done like a whole bunch of landscaping. So she had tons of different plants and whatnot. And I would say the hibiscus, I thought it was such a beautiful flower, and she had all different colors as well. In terms of the personality names or words, I would say bold, vibrant, and colorful.
Nice.
Yeah.
What we find is that the way you describe your favorite flower from childhood describes the way that you bring your greatest gifts into the world. So you are bold, vibrant, and colorful. Does that sound like you?
Yeah, perhaps. Oh, I like that. That's great.
Speaking of bold, well, why don't you just tell us, actually, before we get into the bold topic, just sort of give the listeners a background of how you got to where you are and how you've become such a specialist in this one niche area that's so important for women.
Yeah, I had terrible period problems as a teenager. And in fact, when I first got my period, everything was fine. And then over time, things got progressively worse. And I remember thinking, this can't be my lot in life. But then my mom said, well, I had the same problem, so it might very well be. The really painful periods, really heavy, kind of like heavy to the point where it's leaking through your clothes, which is unbelievably mortifying as a teenager. You may as well just die and never come back to the planet. And, I also had, it's true, right? I also had, really crazy mood swings. Again, that could have been my teenage years, but that I felt was a huge problem too. Horrible bloating, like these, what I would call PMS symptoms now, things like that. And this went on for a number of years. Eventually what started to happen in addition to that is that my period was only coming 2 or 3 times a year, so every 3 or 4 months. And finally I went to see a gynecologist, and I explained everything. And within about 5 minutes, she was pulling out her prescription pad to write me a prescription for the pill. because that, of course, was the thing that was going to solve all of these problems. And that it did. In fact, I remember 1 to 2 months after being on it thinking, wow, I have my life back. I have less painful periods. They're not even near as heavy as they used to be. They come on time every single month, or so I thought. My mood stabilized completely. I felt like I had found my period panacea, and that it was going to be, life is going to be smooth sailing from here on out. Then little did I know that a couple of years later, I would start to have, hair loss and chronic urinary tract infections and yeast infections. And then sex was going to hurt really badly. And my hormone levels were going to kind of flatline, and I would have gut health issues and joint pain. I mean, I could go on and on. I was kind of the poster child for birth control symptoms. But this went on for a number of years and just got progressively worse. And I saw a ton of different doctors and finally saw an acupuncturist because I felt like I got nothing to lose at this point. Nobody's helping. I'd spent thousands of dollars. I'd seen so many different people. No one had offered solutions to all of these, what felt to be seemingly unrelated symptoms. And so in the end, the acupuncturist actually said to me that he felt that the birth control pill was a big part of the problem. And no one had ever said this to me. It was like, what? Like major light bulbs were going off. It was amazing. And so from there on out, sort of like fast track a few years, I started doing weekly acupuncture. I got off the pill. He helped me understand how food works and why I felt so bad when I was eating the way I was eating. He explained stress, exercise, all of these things that, again, had never occurred to me. And I did a complete overhaul. And I remember coming off the pill, getting my period back, and things weren't anywhere near as bad as what they had been as a teenager. But then I was working in film production. I graduated from college, and that was kind of the trajectory I wanted to be on. And it was not at all kind to my personal schedule or life. And those, working those crazy hours, I kind of just let everything I'd learned slip. I was eating all the crappy set food, all that stuff, working literally 16-hour days. And my period started to come back, just the vengeance came back, and I started to have all these issues again. So I had to do a major recommitment to my health. And in that process, I realized that this was not the work for me at all. I just couldn't do it anymore. It was literally killing me, and decided to get more into the health and wellness realm. And, I started taking some classes and things like that, and then realized that, wow, this is actually much more exciting than film production. And so I slowly transitioned, but it took years. It took years of education and whatnot, and the transition period. And so now that's led me to doing this work and really specializing in periods and hormonal health, just because I felt that so many women were experiencing this. Every woman I spoke to was having some kind of issue related to their period. And here I am.
That's interesting because I was just recently in New York City teaching, and I was, yes, we have to meet up next time. I was sitting around this table and I was speaking to two women who are amazing. And one of them was saying like, oh my God, some previous episode you had before, someone mentioned getting off the pill, and she said I was having these like terrible, terrible, terrible migraines. And I got off the pill, like literally they were debilitating her work schedule. She's a professional dancer. She has to travel. You've got to be on, right? And she was getting these like terrible headaches where she couldn't have light and had to be quiet. And she got off the pill, and it like overnight changed her life. And so I think that most people, I would say, don't really know how deeply it can affect your health. I got on the pill when I was like 16, I think, living in Germany. And then I was like growing a little mustache and like all these weird things. I was like,
yes.
And like you said about the infections, and later, for some reason I got off. And then later on, as I was an older adult, I probably shouldn't mention the name, but I was on another pill, and it was causing like a tumor in a breast. And so this is things that I went to see alternative doctors for. I never saw an MD for it, but got rid of that by doing detox baths every night, which was great, but was pretty shocked at the level of toxicity and craziness that could be created in the body based on just taking the pill. I wonder if you could just go into any of the details that you've heard from other women of maybe some like bizarre symptoms that you wouldn't think would necessarily be connected to the pill.
Oh my gosh, yes. And I'm so glad that you brought this up, especially the migraines, because I think I want to preface this by saying that we experience symptoms, and for many of us, first of all, we're not told that those are going to happen necessarily. And a lot of the time we don't, like me, don't connect it to that one thing. And it's really unfortunate because then they are normalized and then we just sort of accept them as being our normal way of being. And that's just a terrible way to live. And I lived like that for a number of years, and I know lots of women do. Migraines or headaches are certainly one symptom that I've seen a lot of. And like I talked about before, you know, this idea of these seemingly unrelated symptoms is what we have to pay attention to. So things that might not seem at all connected. For instance, chronic urinary tract infections, chronic yeast infections, gut health trouble. Like I had said before, I also developed melasma all over my face. And, you know, those are like these brown patches that mostly pregnant women get. And it's usually because of hormonal fluctuation. So I had that terribly throughout my early to mid 20s, which again, debilitated. Yeah, I know, right? I mean, it's as bad as acne, really. And, you know, I tried lasers and all kinds of things. Hair loss is another one. Like you said.
That's funny. I got a little mustache.
Hair loss on your head. Yeah, but hair growth on your face for sure.
I know, it's also awesome when you're 16. You're like,
the injustice of it all. I mean, truly, it's horrifying. And yeah, so things like that. And then also when sex becomes painful, low libido, because again, all of these are connected to your hormones. And we just kind of think that hormones are for puberty and menopause. And we don't realize that they play a pretty vital role in pretty much everything from birth till we die. And so I think that hormones in that respect need a bit of a makeover, because we're at the point where we're really starting to understand now that they play first of all, they play a big role in not only your menstrual cycle, but everything else. And they also work together. So when we disrupt a few hormones like estrogen and progesterone with something like a pill or another form of hormonal birth control, it disrupts all the other hormones. It disrupts testosterone, and it disrupts your adrenals and your thyroid hormones, and then the hormones that come from your brain to talk to all of your endocrine glands. So there's a lot of interplay. In terms of other symptoms, weight gain is another one that, unexplained weight gain. And it's funny, because that was the first symptom I ever heard about as a teenager. And I just thought, oh my God, I might put on 5 to 10 pounds. That is a horrifying thought. And I think that's why I waited so long to even see the doctor and get on the pill. And that was really the only symptom that was on my radar. And for so many women I've spoken to, same thing, because apparently in our society, that's all we care about. We don't care about brain tumors. Anyways, there's another thing called cerebral pseudotumor, which is from progestin-only birth control methods like the implant or the mini pill or something like that. And that's progestin, for everyone who doesn't know, is a synthetic progesterone. And that can cause brain tumor-like symptoms, hence the name pseudotumor. And so, which will impact vision and cause headaches and things like that. So it's really important, if you are experiencing that, look into it. A friend of mine reached out to me a few months back, and that was what she was experiencing. And I'd never heard of it before. And so I did some research on it and wrote a blog post. Anyway, that, as well as, like vision changes as well, dry skin, dry hair, brittle nails, like I said, digestive issues, which will cause, potential yeast overgrowth and, other symptoms too that would arise from nutrient deficiencies, in particular, certain minerals, as well as the B vitamins. So there's a whole host of things. I know I could go on. It's ridiculous. God. Yeah.
It's like, why are we even doing this?
Well, that's a really good question. You want me to answer that? Yeah. I've got some thoughts.
Okay, give me your thoughts.
What's so interesting? I was saying to you before we started recording, so I'm writing my book and I am talking about birth control currently and what I'm writing about right now. And I'm talking about the fact that, the birth control came on the market in 1960 as, finally it was approved as birth control in the United States. But interestingly, prior to that, there were about 500,000 women in the US using it to control their menstrual cycles in some way, shape, or form. And which I always think is so interesting, because I'm like, oh, we were using this the way we're using it now before it was approved for birth control. And what I think happened is that research around contraceptives in general stalled out in the 1980s. And that was for a number of reasons. We don't need to go into it, but it's just like lawsuits and things like that, and stricter guidelines and regulations. But it kind of stalled out. And so the pharmaceutical companies kind of decided, okay, well, we're not really going to innovate when it comes to birth control. Instead, we're going to just use what we've got, rebrand them, repackage them, and push them as these so-called lifestyle drugs, which can help regulate periods and help address acne, and in some cases, hair loss issues and other, painful periods. And that's really what's happened over the last 2 to 3 decades. The other thing that shifted too is direct-to-consumer marketing. And so now we of course push to consumers directly, or have been for 2 to 3 decades. And so that really shifted. And you can see the ads from like the 90s and the 2000s for birth control pills, where now we're talking about, again, the issues regulating your period, less painful periods, endometriosis, controlling endometriosis and other conditions, PCOS, things like that. So that's where this has gone. It's not so much birth control. And that's really reflected, I think, too, in the use of the pill, in that nearly 60% of women who use hormonal birth control actually use it for symptoms other than birth control. So we really, I think,
stunning
shifted.
to me.
Yeah. Isn't that incredible?
That's stunning.
Yeah, I know.
I would not have expected that at all.
It's crazy.
I would have expected that it would be for the convenience of, not having to track things.
That's a huge part of it too. But most
you're saying 67% are using it.
About 60% of women, use the pill for symptoms outside of birth control. So acne.
The doctor's just prescribing it for acne, painful
headaches.
periods.
Yeah, like all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I know.
That's so bizarre.
Heavy periods, irregular periods, all that kind of stuff. And then women who have endometriosis or adenomyosis, or conditions where, there are driven by inflammation and hormonal imbalances, they then put them on the pill so as to quote unquote treat them.
Oh my God, it just gets me every time, because it's
every time
you're not actually getting to the root cause. You're not actually finding what is causing that, and then getting to that root cause. It's just whatever the symptomology is that may or may not have anything to do with your hormones, right?
Absolutely. Completely agree. I mean, I feel like hormones are sort of a second tier, really, when you think about it, and they respond to sort of the first, stimuli, whether that's external or internal, whether it's your food that you're eating, the state of your gut, what's happening with your brain, and, excess stress, all of that. So they respond to inflammation and all of these other stimuli. So then you're now treating your hormones, when really you should be treating like that root cause of what's going on. And it's just not happening, unfortunately, for the most part in conventional medicine.
Unless you're going to see an acupuncturist.
Yes, right, exactly. Or a naturopath or a functional doctor, for sure. Right. Yep.
So talk about getting off the pill. Like, when women are at that point where they're like, this sounds terrible, and I'm counting up the symptoms I have and wondering if they relate to the pill, and maybe I'm ready to get off. Like, what happens?
Yeah, so I think that I'll just talk about my experience, because I feel that a lot of women can relate to that. So I was in college, which, again, not exactly the most responsible time of anyone's life, really. And I was in a serious relationship, so, it's fine, whatever. But I remember feeling like this was my crutch, that this was the thing that protected me from not only getting pregnant, but also from all of the symptoms that I'd had as a teenager. And I certainly did not want to, as bad as the things were, I didn't want to go back to having those painful, heavy periods, because that was really a nightmare. And I distinctly remember thinking, okay, so there's 2 things. There's figuring out how to not get pregnant, and then there's figuring out how to not have all of these symptoms. And again, because I was also seeing an acupuncturist, I was more educated. And so really, I think more than anything, women need to be educated about how their bodies work. If you're not, you're staring down a black hole and you're like, hell no, I'm definitely not doing this. Like, I'm not getting off this thing. And I've had women say that to me over and over again. And I'm like, that's your fear talking, fear of not understanding how your body really works. And so if we can get to that point, first and foremost, like read my blog or someone else's, even buy a book. There are a number of books on the market now talking about your menstrual cycle and body literacy, which is, again, understanding your body in a way that you're able to read signs and signals from it and then make an educated decision about it. And so I really think that we need to do that first and foremost. And then once you have an understanding, then you start making changes. So maybe you go to acupuncture, or maybe you change your diet, or you start to look at your stress and how to manage it better. There are so many things we can do. And it's just a matter, like I said, of really getting quote unquote body literate and really understanding like what's your unique body telling you, because our bodies are talking to us every single day. We just don't know what they're saying because we've never been taught to interpret the signals. And that, I think, is a huge problem in and of itself, especially for women, because we have this whole menstrual cycle that is also, what a lot of my colleagues call the fifth vital sign. And so this is the idea that your menstrual cycle is telling you a lot about your overall health. It's like a barometer for your overall health. And so if we can start to pay attention to that, then we're going to be in like a much better position to get off of the pill or some other form of hormonal birth control. Because there's others as well. It's not just the pill. There's the IUD, there's the patch, there's the NuvaRing, there's the implant that you put in your arm. So there's a depot shot. So there are a number of different ways that we put hormones into our bodies. And if you can, again, start to understand what's happening and start to make small changes, then I feel like you're in a much better position to get off of the pill or some other.
It's so frustrating because I hear women saying that they go in to get an IUD, but then if you're going to get an IUD, right, that there's two options, and then still so many women are using IUDs with the hormones injected into it when just like a regular copper IUD would work fine. Granted, there's other risk factors there too, but it just seems like the hormones just sneak in. They sneak into the conversation all the time, right?
They do, yes.
Is there anything you want to say specifically about any research you've done about the IUD?
Yes, I would love to talk about it. I'm so glad you asked. So for everyone who doesn't know, there is a hormonal IUD and then there's a copper IUD. Copper is called the Paraguard. The hormonal one could be the Mirena, the Skylina, or the Liletta. I just love those pretty names. They always mask them as something pretty. Anyways, so they do different things, and I think it's important for women to understand that. So the hormonal IUD releases progestin, so that's the progesterone, that synthetic progesterone, over a period of a number of years. And what it does is it does it locally, so that really it doesn't necessarily get into your bloodstream. However, I feel like it still impacts your menstrual cycle and your hormonal balance in general, because any foreign object delivering hormones, even if it's locally, it's still, we've got a whole system going. Right. So what it does is it doesn't really, they say that it doesn't stop ovulation, but it does stop your period for the most part. In fact, it's used to treat heavy periods a lot of the time. So it sort of atrophies your uterine lining, so to speak, and makes your cervical fluid inhospitable to sperm. So if an egg happened to be fertilized, if it happened to be, your uterine lining is so thinned out that it would never really implant. And then your cervical fluid is so thickened that sperm can't get through it. So it works in two ways. And so this is why it stops a lot of women's periods. But what I've seen in my own research and in talking to other practitioners is that it stops ovulation a lot of the time as well, which again, we do not want to be stopping ovulation. And I would love to talk more about that, because I think ovulation is truly, talk about the fifth vital sign. That's really what we need to be focused on. Whereas, so the copper IUD now does something similar in that copper is toxic to sperm. It sort of like messes with their motility, meaning their movement. And it creates, that thicker cervical fluid as well, so that sperm can't get through it. And copper, however, brings its own set of problems. There's, this idea of copper excess or copper toxicity. And there's really not a lot in the medical literature about that with regard to the copper IUD. I have just seen my own experience, how problematic it can be. I find both of these IUDs are linked to depression and anxiety and mood disorders. And then with copper, There are other things as well that, it can cause, like copper has an affinity for estrogen. So it can cause this estrogen excess or estrogen dominance. And so a lot of women who've had heavy or painful periods prior to going on that could potentially have them even worse. In fact, that's the number one reason people come off of it, is that it's, the heavy, painful periods, like excruciating pain. Again, this is not to discount the fact that these are very effective birth control methods. And I understand that not everybody can do a natural form of birth control. And in some cases, an IUD is necessary. I just think it's so important for all of us to be fully informed and know what all of these different birth controls, what their side effects are and how effective they are, things like that. So yeah, that's kind of the gist of the IUDs.
And not to mention infections, right? I mean, you can get pelvic inflammatory, which is pretty serious, could cause scarring and then make it harder to get pregnant later.
Yeah, so definitely the copper IUD in particular, yeast infections for sure. In fact, they've found that the string from the copper IUD has like a whole bacterial overgrowth in many cases. They found that too. So that's something to consider as well. Like I found that the copper IUD in particular increases the chance of yeast infections and just vaginal microbiome disruption in general. So yeah, it's really, and there are other risk as well, I think, and it's a small risk, is movement of the IUD and potential perforation of your uterus, for instance. So that, again, it's just another side effect that I think people should know about.
Yeah, I actually had a really close friend had one get lodged in her uterus, and she had to have it surgically removed, which seemed like a total anomaly, but just knowing.
I have a close friend who had that happen too. And I've heard from a lot of women who've had it happen. Again, I'm in this work and this world, so I hear it more often than most, but yeah, no, it's certainly not unheard of.
So I understand, like, traditional Chinese medicine wise or energetically, why it's so important to have your period, that you're flushing out all the toxins. Like, as women, we are fortunate enough to have this like incredibly powerful method of detox every month.
Yes.
I've even heard it from some teachers that we actually have the capacity to help cleanse male figures in our life as well, since they don't have a period, like energetically removing toxins every month. So it's this super extreme gift that I understand. But what is it? So I can understand why it would be good to have periods. What are your thoughts on why it's good to ovulate?
Oh yeah. Oh, I love this. Okay. So juicy, so much to talk about. First of all, periods and ovulation are not mutually exclusive. And I think that we've sort of been led to believe that, especially with with birth control, sort of the advent of birth control and how it reacts in our bodies, or how it causes our bodies to respond. And so this idea of a 28-day cycle, I think it's really important to also preface this by saying that when the researchers who created the birth control pill, when they were doing it, the initial pills, funnily enough, did not allow for a period. You just took them consistently, and women were not down with that at all. They thought they were pregnant. So they had to simulate or emulate a fake period and build that into birth control. And so that's how that whole period came about. But what is happening is when you take a pill or you take some other form of hormones and it turns off ovulation, you're not having a real period. All you're doing is taking hormones for week 1, week 2, week 3, and then those sugar pills or placebo pills for the last week. Or you're taking out the vaginal ring, for instance, or you're taking off the patch. And so what happens is those hormones, those synthetic hormones, those levels drop, and it triggers your uterine lining to, slough off. Anyway, the problem here is that without ovulation, you're never having a true period. So a true period is always followed by ovulation. And so when you're doing all of these synthetic hormones, all you're doing is having a withdrawal bleed, is what we call it, or we call it a pill bleed. And really that is, again, more for peace of mind than anything else. And so ovulation is really, it's sort of at the center of your cycle. I call it the star of the show because I really think it is. And because it makes your hormones. So it makes estrogen, it makes progesterone, it makes testosterone. So all of those, estrogen and testosterone rise in that first half of your cycle. They help to, push the egg out of the follicle, essentially. So that's like a big part of their job. And then in the second half of the cycle, after the egg has been released into the fallopian tube, you start to produce progesterone from the follicle that the egg came from. It's kind of an incredible process, and it requires so much effort on the part of your body. It's really amazing. But the thing is that we have been taught that it's not necessary. Doctors kind of believe that, you should just take a pill and turn that off and replace your endogenous hormones with synthetic hormones that don't look anything like your real hormones. So these fake hormones are just circulating throughout your body and causing potentially lots of problems for years on end in many cases. And so ovulation to me is everything. Like when you're able to make those hormones, it impacts every aspect of your health. It impacts estrogen, for instance, and progesterone impact your brain health. In fact, progesterone plays a role in supporting and building myelin sheaths, which are hugely important for brain and neurological health. And estrogen as well, like it plays a role in your gut health. It plays a role in your libido, your vaginal tissue. It atrophies if you don't have enough estrogen in your body. Progesterone is the anti-anxiety calming hormone for that second half of your cycle. So again, it really works to address, if you have PMS symptoms, it's likely you're progesterone deficient, for instance. Testosterone is like a huge muscle bone driver. It's a driver of confidence and energy and focus. So there's all of these amazing hormones that we're just kind of told are not that important. And, and what I see a lot of is women who've been on birth control for a long period of time and they have bone health issues or bone density issues like osteopenia and potentially even osteoporosis in their 20s and 30s. Because they've just not had enough estrogen to support their bone growth. And our bones grow in puberty and finish in our early 20s in some cases.
God, so scary.
Yeah, I know, terrifying. So we're basically stunting all of that. So that's why I think ovulation is like crucial for us to be focused on having every single month rather than suppressing.
Wow.
Yeah.
And okay, so let's talk about for the 40% that are using the pill for being able to control when they don't get pregnant. What do you recommend instead?
Oh, yes, I know. So this is the age-old question, and it's, I think, the biggest challenge for modern women, because I get the culture of popping a pill or using, the NuvaRing, for instance, or a patch, or having an IUD or an implant. Like, these are really convenient ways to prevent pregnancy from occurring. And I think that culturally they work because, again, there is no standard of sex education or body literacy education at any stage in our education in the US. And so as a result, we're handed a pill and we call it a day. However, I think it's so easy. I know, it really is.
Anything. We can just...
It's so great, isn't it? I know. On more levels than one, right? I know, exactly. It's so true. It's totally true. On more levels than one, you ignore your fertility, you can ignore all the period pain and the heavy periods and all the other acne and symptoms like that. So, for me, when I got off the pill, I decided that I was going to just start tracking my cycle and see what happened. And that was on the advice of my acupuncturist. And so at the time, I used a paper calendar. I mean, I'm so dating myself right now, but I did. And I was just tracking it and using condoms. And I think that I think it's important to highlight the fact that there's definitely been a push or a move away from barrier methods as legitimate birth control. It's very strange. Like, women will say to me, yeah, I'm not on birth control, I just use condoms. And I'm like, well, condoms are birth control. And for whatever reason, well, I know the reasons, I won't get political, but we have moved away from that and we've moved towards, again, these hormonal types of birth control. But condoms, when used properly, are extremely effective. And so are diaphragms when they're used effectively or used properly as well. Anyways, so the point is that I started, tracking my cycle, using condoms in the time that I was fertile. And so for women, it's really important for us to understand that you're really only fertile for 1 to 2 days out of every month. Like, technically you by yourself can only get pregnant 1 to 2 days out of every month, because the egg in your fallopian tube will only survive for 12 to 24 hours. Men are fertile every single day of their lives. I mean, they could literally get a woman pregnant every single day of every year for most of them, which is really unbelievable when you think about it. And yet the onus of birth control is not on them. And that drives me a little crazy because they really need to step up in this whole conversation and be involved. I mean, if you're in a committed relationship, most especially. I mean, if you're not, that's a bit of a different story. But I think that it falls on us. So ultimately, because it does, I think that tracking your cycle is a huge part of this, understanding when you are fertile versus when you're not. Like I said, this method I use is the fertility awareness method. And I've been using it for like 15 years now, maybe 12 to 15 years, somewhere around there. And so it involves tracking your cycle. It involves charting your body temperature. So your basal body temperature, which is that temperature first thing upon awakening. And that changes, which is so cool. So ovulation and progesterone actually make your temperature rise. So in the first half, it's lower. Second half, it's higher. And then also charting your cervical fluid. So your cervical fluid gets really wet after estrogen and testosterone start to rise, and then it dries up and gets sticky after progesterone starts to rise. So there's a distinct change in that. And I found that charting those two symptoms every single day has been a game changer for me. I've never been pregnant, and I know exactly when something is wrong potentially. If my temperatures go crazy or my cervical fluid changes, I know that there's something up. So it's useful in more ways than one. I think for women who are like, hell no, Nicole, I ain't doing that. There are other options too. So there is something that I use called Daisy. I use like 5 different things because why not? I love to experiment, but I use something called Daisy. And so that's a fertility tracker, and that will give you a green light or a red light. You take your temperature, obviously, and it'll give you a green or red light depending on your fertility status. And it takes about 2 to 3 months to learn your cycle. But once it does, it's 99.3% accurate. You just use a barrier method, or you abstain, or you don't have
on those 1 to 2 days.
Well, no. So it's going to give you longer days. And the reason it does that is because the Daisy can't predict exactly the day that you're ovulating. It gives you a 2 to 3 day window. So Daisy usually is cautious, and it gives you about I've had anywhere from 8 to 12 days where I'm considered fertile. For me though, I know, because I'm also doing the fertility awareness method at the same time, that, I know my exact day, and sperm can live for up to for 5, sometimes potentially 7 days. I try to be cautious with this in your body, especially when fertile cervical fluid is present, because they love that stuff. So they can live inside of you for 5 to 7 days. So really you're looking at about a 7 to 10 day window if you're being super cautious for being fertile. But the rest of the month, you're not fertile. And that means you can have unprotected sex. And women are just like, wait, what? Nobody ever told me this. So many women think that they're fertile every single day of the month. And that's just not the case at all. So that's kind of the gist of what I'm doing right now and what I would recommend. Although I recognize that it takes effort, and it does take some know-how on your part, but the rewards are immense. I mean, they just really are. It's really, I think, a life-changing experience for women.
But honestly, how long does that take? You first thing in the morning, you pop a temperature thing, right? And then you do the cervical check. That probably takes you all of 2 minutes?
Pretty much. Yeah. And you can see it. If you just go to the bathroom, I tell women, when you go to the bathroom, look at your cervical fluid. You'll notice it. It becomes wetter, stretchier, creamier, you can see it between your fingers. It kind of looks like egg white. So you notice that leading up to ovulation, and then it definitely shifts. And when you have that shift, you know that you're basically no longer fertile. So it's really, it's an amazing thing to discover about yourself. And so I'm all about it. But I agree with you. It really, at the most 5 to 10 minutes a day, if you're really sort of paying attention and trying to figure out what's going on.
What are some of the other rewards that when you say just knowing your body has given you so many rewards, besides just being able to not get pregnant when you don't want to get pregnant?
Yeah.
Tell me more, some of the more, is it feeling in touch with the wisdom of your body, or what are some of the other rewards that you experience?
Oh my gosh, so many. So I really feel for instance, a lot of women don't realize that because our hormones change so much throughout the month, it actually changes us. And so I've talked about this in my programs, like tapping into your cycle superpowers, this idea that you are not a different person every week of the month, but you definitely have different personality traits and things shift. And so not only do the hormones drive these physical changes, but mentally and emotionally as well. And for instance, I'm approaching ovulation. I love doing interviews around ovulation time because my brain works really well, thanks to estrogen and testosterone. I can speak pretty well. For the most part, I feel like I've strung a good amount of sentences together, and I feel more confident. In fact, estrogen and testosterone, estrogen in particular, makes your skin look better. You feel like you look better. And that is evolution. I mean, that is us basically continuing humanity, because you look good around ovulation, you feel really good around ovulation. So it's like mating time. It's so ridiculous, but it's true. And so I always recommend women, like if they're in business or working or whatever, these are the times to be asking for a raise, or to be, leading meetings or doing interviews, or getting out there and doing lots of physical activity and meeting with friends and going to public speaking events or doing public speaking events, things like that around this time of your cycle. This is when you can maximize those to their fullest potential. And then as you are winding down and moving towards getting your period, you will notice that you want to stay closer to home, that you don't really want to be out public speaking. And you can really start to, I think, cater your life to how your menstrual cycle and how it's working. And I don't know, to me, that has been the gift that just keeps giving in so many ways. I think also too, it helps you know yourself. That on day 27, for instance, you're getting your period in a day or two. That is so not the time to go on another date, or on a new date, or date someone who you've never met before, or, whatever, do anything that would require you.
For sure. The first day you kind of want to seclude yourself. You need quiet.
Pretty much. Yeah. But so many women are just pushing themselves every single day. We don't realize that our bodies are so cyclical in nature that in the end, we just push ourselves as hard as we possibly can every day of the month. And we really suffer. PMS is out of control, and you have, multiple period issues, and you don't know what to do. This is because our bodies are literally begging us for a rest. So it's really important, I think, to look at that.
Speaking of cycles, I noticed that, not having been on the pill for quite some time now, many years, that for myself and other women, our cycles can sync up to the moon, which I think is also a really interesting concept, that our bodies can become so kind of synchronistic with the earth and the moons that, for example, you might ovulate around new moon and get your period around full moon, which is in my case. So you kind of know, it's especially so many people are tracking astrology these days, that it's
yes.
If you can kind of link things up time-wise. Have you seen that in any of the people that you work with? Do you talk about moon cycles along with women's cycles?
I do. I actually just got this book, and Moon Time. It's a good one. And it is such a thing. I feel like moons are having a moment. The moon is having a moment, just like periods are. And everyone's talking about that. And so the idea is that, women traditionally cycled with the moon, right? So we ovulated with the full moon, we bled on the new moon. And in that time, you just sort of, it was your lowest energy time. It's sort of the lowest energy time as well. We're in darkness and on the earth. And so it's interesting too, because babies are mostly born on the full moon. So we really are influenced by it. There's no doubt about that. Anyway, I'm kind of ovulating right now near the full moon. I'm syncing back up again. I went off sync, but again, there's no wrong way to do this. But I do find that women who are, synced with the moon, they find that their ovulation time in particular is very high energy. And then their new moon time or their period time is really quite low energy. And they're, really focused on just taking care of themselves. And so a lot of women want to do that. And I think, again, though, we're all sort of in sync with the moon. I mean, if we're paying attention to it, but it is certainly a thing for sure.
That's awesome. And anything else that we should know about? Do you know anything about, let's see, When you're getting off the pill, do you have any recommendations for women who are looking to get pregnant in terms of time to wait until your hormones regulate? You get a few good cycles in. Would you
Yes.
recommend? I mean, I've always heard that when you get off the pill, you're like super duper fertile, but should women wait a bit? What can you add about that?
Well, first of all, I think it depends on how long you've been on the pill for, and what you went on the pill for. Was it birth control, or was it other things, or was it both? But I always recommend, I know this sounds probably excessive, but I suggest women wait a year. And the reason I say that is because along with dysregulation in your hormones comes nutrient deficiencies, potential gut health issues, things of that nature. And you really, really want to correct that before getting pregnant, because you're the house for your baby for 9 to 10 months. I mean, you really want to make sure that you have adequate nutrient stores, that your thyroid is okay, because the pill also downregulates your thyroid. It's not great. And your thyroid, you need it to be working great before you go into pregnancy and throughout pregnancy. So, and your gut health as well. Like, what are you passing on to your baby in terms of its microbiome, and how is it going to be populated from you? So, and the nutrient deficiencies too, in particular, like I said, the B vitamins, folate and B12 in particular, especially for pregnancy, and the minerals like magnesium and zinc and selenium, those are huge for pregnancy, and those tend to be depleted for long-term birth control use. So there are a number of factors that need to be considered. And I always recommend women, either buying a few books on this topic and really addressing deficiencies, or working with someone like a fertility specialist who can address all of those factors.
And then a total sort of random sideways question here, but since you're so educated on this matter, can you tell us anything about cysts? Because this is a topic that I hear coming up over and over and over and over and over. I mean, I actually thought, geez, I should probably do like a whole podcast episode about cysts, because
ovarian cysts.
So many women getting them. Do you have any insights you can give us?
Yes. Oh my gosh. Okay. So I find that,
and no one's talking about it. That's the other thing I find is weird.
True.
Like, women don't talk about miscarriages and they don't talk about cysts, and they're both so common.
They are. You're so right. I agree with that. Yeah. Cysts are not that complicated. That's the thing. So I think most of the time, everyone should know, most of the time ovarian cysts are what they are really, it's just so everyone knows, are those little follicles. So basically you have those follicles on your ovary, and one of them matures every month. But so ovarian cysts are really just those follicles. And sometimes they, grow a little bit bigger and they just sort of stay there. It's not a big deal. In most cases, they just resolve themselves and we all go about our business. In some cases, though, one will get one or maybe even a few will get too big and become problematic. And that I found most of the time women are told it's either from being on birth control, or they are told just to go back on birth control to address it. I know, right? So they've come off the pill and they start to have these cysts, and then they are just told to go back on it, or they've been on it and they are having cyst issues. So there's, it's complicated, but I have found that they're so linked to what's happening with your diet, what's going on with your stress, what's going on with your general hormonal balance. And in pretty much every case of ovarian cysts, just sort of like those benign ones that could potentially rupture, they're easily fixed by changing your diet and really flooding your body with nutrients. That to me has been a really big help. And then also too, I've found vaginal steaming. A lot of women really, really vouch for that as vaginal steaming, not only for ovarian cysts, but period pain and brown blood spotting, things like that. And also castor oil packs. So that's another one too. And, I wrote about it on my blog and I've had so many women say that to me too. It's just for period pain in general or pelvic pain, but ovarian cysts in particular, castor oil is pretty remarkable. Wow. So there are a few things that you can do, but I don't recommend going back on birth control for it, because I've seen it be so problematic. It just won't address the root cause of the cysts.
And castor oil packs being the oil in the flannel that you put
exactly
warm on your belly so that it basically sucks toxins out through your skin?
Practically, yes. I mean, that's a very unscientific way of saying it, but yeah. Totally. Basically, I mean, it's so funny because, I'm always trying to be cautious of not saying things like, suck toxins out of your skin just because.
I'm so unscientific.
No, okay, good. I'm glad. All right. In that case. Good. Yeah.
But that's literally what happens, right?
Yeah, I know. But people are like, Nicole. So yeah, well, it's totally what it does. I mean, it's an amazing healing practice using castor oil on your skin. And yes, putting the flannel over it and then putting a hot water bottle or something and sitting there for about 20 to 30 minutes with it on. And only when you're not bleeding, because it can cause extra bleeding. So you want to do it in the times of your cycle, 1 to 2 times a week when you're not actually bleeding. But yeah, it's amazing.
And vaginal steams. So this is something that I learned about a few years ago at a Korean spa.
Oh, cool.
And this would be like Chinese herbs or Western herbs that are like lightly, gently steamed up through your lady parts, right?
Essentially, yes. Yeah. So it's using different herbs and really sitting over a bowl of essentially steaming hot herbs for another 15 to 20 minutes, making sure obviously that the water is not too hot and that you're not going to burn yourself, easing your way down. But the idea, a lot of people are like, you're steam cleaning your vagina. I'm like, no, you're not doing that. It's the idea is that these herbs are, sitting below you and they are in the steam, and that is just sort of penetrating your skin, so to speak. But I don't totally, again, know the science around it, but it works.
Yeah, for sure. We had a client once who was a Korean woman, and she had a Korean bathhouse, and she swore that that's how she got pregnant. She tried for years to get pregnant, and she just went back to her roots and started doing bee steaming, and boom, got pregnant really fast. So
love that. It's so true. I've had other women say that too. I've had women talk about period pain, that nothing has worked, and that has been their go-to.
You know what I use for period pain? I don't know if you've heard of this, but my acupuncturist started me doing this. It's so funny. It's moxibustion.
Yeah.
And you can put this little piece inside this little, to me, it looks like a metal temple or something.
Oh, yeah.
And then you tuck it into this funny little round, almost looks like a fanny pack. It's super nerdy. And you buckle in your little fanny pack.
No.
Yeah, it's awesome. And this burning piece of mugwort is inside that little temple. And so it's really warm. It's warm like a hot water bottle, but it's also super relaxing and especially good for reproductive system for women. Yeah. And then you see oftentimes in the Korean bathhouses, in some of the hot tubs, they'll have a huge bunch of mugwort in a bag. And it's almost like you're bathing in mugwort tea because it's so good for women.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I love that. But it's definitely nerdy, something you want to do at home only.
Right. Yes, of course. I know, right? Yeah, exactly. No kidding. I love it. That's a great one.
Well, in wrapping up, do you have any words of wisdom, anything you find yourself telling women commonly, any piece of advice, or just sort of words of wisdom that spring to your heart in the moment right now?
Yes. I am just wanting to constantly remind women that they have the answers, that you don't need to continue looking outside of yourself for solutions to the issues that you might be experiencing, whether it is period problems or hormonal issues or whatever it is, that we are equipped with this intuition, this wisdom that nobody else can have about ourselves. And I just encourage all women to start to tap into that, to listen to that voice. It might be very faint, but it's there. And to really pay attention to it and start to make decisions from that place versus all of the external opinions. Really tap into that.
Love that advice.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for being with us, Nicole.
Thank you so much for having me, Katie.
Really, really appreciate it. And if you want to know more about Nicole, she has tons of really juicy blog posts on her website. You can find her at Nicole Jardim, and that's spelled JARDIM.com. And she's on all the social media channels as well under her name. And so you can find out lots of information about her there. And do you also want to talk about programs, your quiz, e-course, anything that the listeners should know about?
Totally. So on my website, on NicoleJardim.com, you can find my quiz, and that is basically my period quiz. And that will start to give you some answers as to what could be going on. And I provide video results and then, give you a ton of information around like what specifically might be happening for you based on your answers to the quiz. So that's a really good first start.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah.
Super. Thank you so much, Nicole.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to the Flower Lounge. I'm Katie Hess, and we'll be releasing a new podcast every Wednesday. If you like what you heard, or you know someone who might be touched by our conversation, share it with them. And don't forget to subscribe. To find out what your favorite flowers mean about you, take the quiz at LOTUSWEI.com.